The late afternoon sun was dropping low, painting the small shops along the street in warm orange light. David Miller sat behind the wheel of his car, his eyes heavy from days without real sleep. It had been 4 days since his little girl, Emma, disappeared. 4 days of endless calls to the police, of news crews parked outside his house, of friends telling him to stay strong when his heart was breaking in silence. He pulled over near a corner store, barely aware of why, when something caught his eye. A girl no older than 10 stood on the sidewalk with a cardboard box of candy. Her sneakers were worn through, her sweatshirt too thin for the cool air. She moved from car to car, holding out the box with a voice too soft for the noisy street. David might have looked away. On any other day, he might have reached for $1 and driven off. But it wasn't the candy that stopped him. It was the small fabric doll the girl carried in her free hand. A doll with uneven stitches and a faded red ribbon at the neck. His breath caught in his throat. That doll wasn't just familiar. It was the very one he had sewn years ago for Emma, the one she still kept close to her pillow every night. David's heart pounded as if the world had narrowed down to that single object in the girl's hand. He shoved the car door open and stumbled onto the sidewalk, his voice trembling before he even realised he was speaking. "Where did you get that doll?" The girl froze, clutching it tight, her dark eyes wide with fear. She looked ready to bolt, like someone who had learned too young not to trust strangers. David raised his hands, desperate, pleading. "Please, that belongs to my daughter. She's missing." The street noise faded around him. All that mattered was the answer the girl would give. The girl tightened her grip on the doll, her shoulders stiff as if she expected him to snatch it away. For a moment, she didn't speak at all. Cars rolled past, horns blaring, a bus hissed to a stop nearby. But David barely noticed. His whole world was in that child's silence. Finally, she whispered, her voice small but steady, "I didn't steal it." David's throat tightened. I didn't say you did," he answered quickly, taking a step back so he wouldn't scare her more. His hands trembled as he tried to keep his voice calm. "That doll belongs to my daughter, Emma. She's only 7. She's been missing for days. Please, do you know where she is?" The girl's eyes flickered with something, fear, pity, maybe both. She glanced up and down the street, then back at him. "I saw her," she said finally, almost too soft to hear. David's knees went weak. You saw her? Where?" The girl licked her lips, as if weighing whether she could trust him. She looked far too young to carry the kind of caution that hardened her face. "She was hiding in an old warehouse near the train tracks. I thought she was gone at first, but she gave me this." She lifted the doll slightly. "She told me to find her dad." Tears burned David's eyes. The hope that had been slipping away came rushing back, fierce and sharp. He pressed a hand to his chest as if to steady himself. "She's alive?" The girl gave a small nod. "I brought her water, some food when I could, but she's scared, real scared." David could barely breathe. For days he had prayed for a sign, any sign that his daughter was still out there. And now, out of nowhere, a child no one noticed had become the lifeline he never expected. "Please," he said, his voice breaking, "take me to her." The girl hesitated, her gaze darting to the busy street, the strangers walking by. She lowered her voice until it was almost a whisper, meant only for him. "We can't take your car. Too many people watching. If the wrong person sees us." She trailed off, hugging the doll tight against her chest. David frowned. "What do you mean, the wrong person?" The girl lifted her eyes, and for the first time David saw just how old they looked in that young face. "Because I know who put her there," she said quietly. "And he's not going to like that I'm talking to you." David's chest tightened at the girl's words. She knows who did this. For a moment he could only stare at her, the noise of the street blurring around them. His mind raced. If she was telling the truth, then this wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a betrayal. "Listen," he said softly, bending down to her eye level. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I just need to get my daughter back. If you help me, I promise I'll keep you safe." The girl's eyes searched his face, measuring his words the way only someone who had learned distrust too young could. Then she gave a small nod. "Follow me, but stay close." She slipped through the crowd with a quickness that startled him. David hurried after, his heart pounding harder with every step. They cut through a narrow alley that smelled of damp concrete and old trash, past a chain-link fence, and toward the edge of the neighbourhood where the city gave way to old industrial lots. The girl stopped at the corner of a deserted block. She pointed toward a squat brick warehouse, its windows broken, its walls covered in faded graffiti. "She's in there," she whispered. "Down in the basement. I've been sneaking in through the side door." David's throat went dry. The place looked abandoned, the kind of building you'd cross the street to avoid. He could hardly picture his little Emma, his bright, laughing girl, inside those crumbling walls. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked gently. The girl hugged the doll tight against her chest. "Cops don't listen to kids like me. They see me, they just tell me to move along. Besides, the man who left her there, he knows people. Important people. If he finds out I told you..." Her voice cracked and she looked away. David felt a surge of protective anger, not at her, but at the world that forced a child to carry such fear. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing telling me. I'm not letting him hurt her, or you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The warehouse loomed ahead like a shadow waiting to swallow them whole. David took a deep breath, his mind fixed on only one thing: his daughter was inside. "Show me the way," he said. And with that, the girl turned toward the broken side door, her small figure leading him into the darkness where his worst fears, and perhaps the truth, were waiting. The air inside the warehouse was heavy with dust and silence, broken only by the creak of their footsteps on the concrete floor. David's pulse hammered in his ears as he followed the girl down a narrow hallway. Every shadow felt threatening, every echo like it might give them away. At the end of the hall, she stopped at a rusted metal door. She pressed a finger to her lips, then carefully pulled it open, just wide enough to slip through. David followed, holding his breath as they descended a set of steep stairs. The light grew dimmer with every step, the smell of mildew stronger. And then he heard it, a soft whimper, faint but unmistakable, his heart clenched. "Emma?" His voice cracked as he whispered into the darkness. A small figure stirred in the corner. On a thin, dirty mattress lay his daughter. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks pale, dark circles under her eyes. She clutched a worn teddy bear he didn't recognize, her tiny body curled up tight as if to make herself invisible. When she lifted her head and saw him, her lips parted in disbelief. "Daddy?" David dropped to his knees, tears spilling before he could stop them. "It's me, sweetheart, I'm here." Emma scrambled off the mattress and into his arms. She was so light it broke him, as though fear had hollowed her out. He held her close, careful not to squeeze too hard, terrified of hurting her fragile body. "I thought you wouldn't find me," she whispered against his chest. Her voice was hoarse, her words trembling. "I never stopped looking," David said, rocking her gently, not for 1 second. Behind them, the girl stood quietly, watching with the solemn eyes of someone who knew what it meant to feel abandoned. For a moment, it was as if she understood the weight of the reunion better than anyone else could. David brushed the hair back from Emma's face. "You're safe now. I've got you." But even as he said it, his mind twisted with questions. Who would do this to a child? Who would dare? And then Emma's small voice, almost too weak to carry, cut through his racing thoughts. She leaned close, trembling, and whispered, "Daddy, it was Uncle Brian." The name hit David like a punch to the chest. For a moment he thought he had misheard. He pulled back just enough to see Emma's face. Her lips were trembling, her small hands clutching at his shirt as if she was afraid he might let go. "Sweetheart," he whispered carefully, "what did you just say?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Uncle Brian. He's the one who locked me here. He said if I told anyone something bad would happen to you." Her voice broke on the last word, and she buried her face against his shoulder. David's whole body went cold. Brian was more than a business partner. He was family. They had built the company together. Brian had been the first to show up at the hospital when Emma was born. He had toasted David's wife on their wedding anniversary. He had stood at her funeral 2 years ago, hand on David's shoulder, promising to always be there. And now this. His mind reeled. If Brian had done this, it wasn't random, it wasn't some stranger's crime. It was planned. which meant there was more at stake than just cruelty. There was a reason. David tightened his arms around Emma. "He can't hurt you anymore," he said firmly, though inside he was shaking. The girl, Zoe, shifted uncomfortably near the door. "I heard him on the phone," she said in a low voice. "He was talking about papers, money, deals, like he needed you gone for a while so he could sign things without you knowing." David turned toward her, stunned by the calm way she said it. "You're telling me this wasn't just about Emma?" Zoe hugged the doll tighter. "It was about your company, about making sure you weren't there to stop him." The weight of it crashed over David all at once, the sleepless days, the frantic searches, the endless media interviews. While he had been tearing the city apart looking for his daughter, Brian had been tearing something else apart, his life's work. A wave of nausea rose in his throat. He pressed his cheek against Emma's hair, fighting the rage that threatened to spill over. 15 years of trust, 15 years of friendship, and Brian had traded it all for greed. David's voice shook, but there was steel underneath it now. If he thinks he can take my daughter and my company, he has no idea who he's dealing with. He stood slowly, still holding Emma, and looked at Zoe. "You said you know more. Then I need you to tell me everything. Every word you heard, every place you saw him." Zoe nodded, her expression grave. "But if we do this, you gotta promise me something." "What's that?" David asked. "That you don't let him win." By the time David carried Emma out of the warehouse, the sun had set. The city lights blinked on one by one, but the night felt heavier than usual. He buckled Emma gently into the back seat of his car, wrapping his jacket around her thin shoulders. Zoe slid into the passenger seat, clutching the doll in silence. David drove straight to the nearest community hospital. Inside the bright white halls, doctors checked Emma carefully, speaking in hushed voices about dehydration, bruises on her wrists, and the kind of fear that doesn't leave quickly. David stayed close to her side, holding her hand as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the ground. When the nurse finally said Emma could rest in a private room, David stepped out into the hallway. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Brian. For a moment, David couldn't breathe. The name alone made his chest tighten. He let the call go to voicemail, but almost immediately it buzzed again and again. Finally, David picked up, his voice hoarse. "Brian." "David, thank God." Brian's voice poured through the speaker, smooth and practiced. "I heard nothing from you all day. Have the police found any leads? I've been so worried. You need to keep me updated, brother." "Brother?" The word burned. David forced his tone steady. "Not yet. I'll let you know if I hear anything." There was a pause, just long enough to feel calculated. "Don't lose hope," Brian said too warmly. "You know I'll do anything to help." David hung up before his anger could slip through. He stood in the hallway, his fists clenched, his pulse racing. Brian was checking in because he wanted to know how much David knew. Back in the room, Emma slept with her teddy bear tucked against her cheek. Zoe sat by the window, her knees pulled up to her chest. "That man," she said quietly, not looking at him, "he's going to figure out you found her. He's not stupid." David nodded slowly. She was right. Brian wasn't stupid. He was careful, deliberate, the kind of man who covered his tracks. And now he'd be wondering if his secret had slipped. David sank into the chair beside Emma's bed. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, then looked at Zoe. "That's why we can't just run. We have to be ready for whatever he does next." Zoe studied him for a moment, her expression older than her years. "Then you better be smart," she said, "because he already knows how to play this game." Outside, the glow of the city pressed against the hospital windows. Somewhere out there, Brian was waiting, watching, and David knew the real fight was only beginning. The next morning, David woke stiff in the hospital chair, Emma's small hand still curled inside his. For the first time in days, she had slept through the night, her breathing even, her face softer than when he found her. Relief tugged at his heart, but it didn't last. When he stepped out into the hospital parking lot, he noticed it right away. A black sedan idling 2 rows down. The engine hummed low, the driver hidden behind tinted glass. David's gut clenched. He tried to brush it off. Hospitals always had cars coming and going. But when he returned later that afternoon, the same sedan was there, parked a few spaces closer. Inside the hospital cafeteria, Zoe pushed a tray of fries across the table toward him. "You haven't eaten all day," she said. David forced a smile, though his mind was somewhere else. He leaned closer. "Did you see that car outside? Black with tinted windows?" Zoe nodded slowly. "Yeah, it was here yesterday too." She dipped a fry in ketchup, but her hand shook slightly. "You think it's him?" "I know it is," David muttered. That evening, as the sky dimmed, his phone rang again. Brian. David didn't answer, but the voicemail came through seconds later. "David, where are you? I stopped by your house earlier. Place looked empty. You're not avoiding me, are you? We're supposed to be in this together." David's jaw tightened. Brian wasn't calling out of concern. He was circling, trying to pin down what David knew. When he returned to Emma's room, Zoe was drawing on the back of a paper placemat with a borrowed pen. She held it up, an outline of the hospital, with arrows pointing to the side streets she knew by heart. "You need to stop coming in the front entrance," she said simply. "He's watching you. If you go out the back, through the loading dock, you can slip past him." David stared at her, this girl who had spent her life being invisible now teaching him how to survive in plain sight. "Zoe," he said quietly, "why are you helping us? You could have walked away." She looked down at the doll beside her tray, the stitches fraying at the edges. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody shows up for you, and she glanced toward Emma's bed, "doesn't deserve that." David swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. For days he had felt like the world was closing in, but somehow this girl, this stranger, was holding the door open. "Then we'll do this together," he said, "but I promise you, Brian won't see what's coming." Outside, the black sedan pulled away from the lot, its taillights glowing red against the night. Somewhere inside, Brian was already plotting his next move. David knew he couldn't keep Emma hidden in a hospital room forever. Brian was circling too close, and sooner or later he would push harder. He needed help, someone who understood the law better than Brian's lies. That night, after making sure Emma was asleep and Zoe curled up in a chair by her side, David stepped into the quiet hospital corridor and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Sarah Lopez picked up on the second ring. "David?" Her voice carried the same steadiness he remembered from college. "It's been a long time." "I wouldn't call if it wasn't important," he said, his throat dry. "I need a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, someone who won't flinch when things get ugly." There was a pause, then Sarah answered firmly, "Where are you?" An hour later, she was sitting in the cafeteria across from him, her suit jacket draped over the chair, hair pulled back, a pen already tapping against her notebook. "Tell me everything," she said. David told her. All of it. The disappearance, the warehouse, Emma's whispered confession, Zoe's recordings of Brian's phone calls. Sarah didn't interrupt, didn't look away. She just listened, her eyes sharp, her jaw tightening with every detail. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "You realise what this is, right? He didn't just take your daughter, he staged it to buy time. While you were tearing the city apart looking for Emma, he was moving money, signing contracts, reshaping the company under your nose." David nodded grimly. "Well, that's what Zoe heard. Deals, papers, money." Sarah flipped open her notebook. "We need to track every signature, every transfer. If he overstepped his authority, that's fraud. And if we can tie Emma's kidnapping to it..." She shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's not just criminal, that's monstrous." David rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing him down. "The police barely listened when I begged them to search for Emma. What makes you think they'll take this seriously?" Sarah's pen stilled. "Because this time, we're not going in with theories, we're going in with proof." At that moment, Zoe slipped into the cafeteria, holding her phone like it was something precious. "I got another one," she said softly, setting it on the table. "He was at the bar again tonight, talking about how David's too broken up to notice what's happening at the office." Sarah reached for the phone, pressing play. Brian's voice came through clear, smug and careless. David's stomach twisted. Hearing Brian talk about him like that, like he was weak, blind, lit a fire in his chest. Sarah closed the phone with a snap. "This is good, very good, but we're going to need more. Enough to bury him, not just bruise him." David looked at Zoe, then at Sarah. For the first time since Emma disappeared, he felt something stronger than despair. Resolve. "Then let's get to work," he said. The plan seemed simple enough. Zoe would slip into the corner booth at O'Malley's, the bar where Brian liked to meet his contacts, and record whatever she could. Sarah had outfitted her phone with a secure app, one that would back up audio the moment it was captured. "If anything goes wrong, at least we won't lose the recording," Sarah had told her. But David hated it. The thought of sending a child into that place turned his stomach. He argued for hours, pacing the length of Sarah's apartment where they had been meeting in secret. "She's just a kid," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I can't let her do this." Zoe sat cross-legged on the couch, arms wrapped around that worn doll as if it gave her strength. "Nobody notices me," she said matter-of-factly. "That's why it works. He won't look twice. To him, I'm invisible." Her words cut deep. David wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she wasn't invisible, but in Brian's world of suits and boardrooms, she was right, and maybe that was their only advantage. That night, David parked across the street from O'Malley's, heart pounding as Zoe slipped inside with a tray of sodas she'd convinced the bartender to let her carry. She moved between tables with practiced ease, head down, like she belonged. In the back corner, Brian was already leaning over the table with two men in dark jackets. Zoe drifted closer, setting down drinks at a nearby booth, her phone recording from her pocket. David watched through the window, every muscle in his body taut. Sarah sat beside him in the car, her laptop open, the audio feed live in her earbuds. "She's in," Sarah whispered. For a few minutes, it worked. Brian's voice came through clear, bragging about contracts signed, money moved. David, too distracted to notice, every word was another nail in the coffin. Then it happened. One of the men at the table glanced around and frowned. His eyes lingered on Zoe longer than they should have. David's breath caught. Through the glass, he saw Zoe stiffen, her tray trembling in her hands. The man leaned toward Brian, whispering something. Brian turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping the bar. Sarah's eyes widened. "He's looking for her!" David gripped the door handle, ready to bolt inside. His chest felt like it might explode. But just as Brian's eyes reached her corner, Zoe stumbled deliberately, letting a glass tip from her tray and shatter on the floor. Heads turned. Laughter broke out. The bartender scolded her for the mess. And in that chaos, Zoe slipped away. Moments later, the passenger door of David's car flew open and Zoe tumbled in, breathing hard, clutching her phone like it was gold. David pulled her into a hug before he could stop himself. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." His voice shook, equal parts anger and relief. Zoe smirked weakly, still catching her breath. "I got everything," she said, holding up the phone. Sarah pressed her laptop closer, checking the feed. When Brian's voice came through, crisp and damning, she looked up at David. "This is it," she whispered. "This is enough to bring him down." Back at the hospital, David sat at Emma's bedside, his hands wrapped around hers as if he could shield her from the memories that haunted her. The doctors had warned him recovery wouldn't be quick. Her body was weak, her sleep restless. Sometimes she woke gasping, clutching the teddy bear as if it were her last protection. That night she stirred again, her voice a frightened whisper. "Daddy, he said you wouldn't believe me, that you'd pick him over me." David's chest tightened. "No, sweetheart," he said, smoothing her tangled hair. "I will always believe you, always. Nothing he says could change that." She searched his face as if trying to measure the truth, then closed her eyes and drifted back into shallow sleep. Out in the hallway, David leaned against the wall, exhausted, running both hands over his face. That's when Zoe appeared, carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate from the vending machine downstairs. "You look like you need this more than me," she said, offering him one. He took it, the warmth seeping into his hands. "How did you even get the money?" She shrugged. "Guy at the desk gave it to me, said no kid should sit around here with nothing warm to drink." Her mouth twisted into a wry smile. "Guess sometimes people do notice." David looked at her, this girl who had lived so much of her life on the margins, now sitting in the middle of his family's storm. "You saved her, Zoe. You know that, right? If you hadn't found her..." His voice caught and he shook his head. "I don't even want to think about it." Zoe sipped her drink quietly. "I didn't save her alone. She held on. She kept telling me to find you." She glanced at him sideways. "That's what kept me going too, figuring maybe someone out there still believed in her." David swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. For Emma, for Zoe, for every child overlooked or silenced, he couldn't let Brian win. The next morning, Sarah arrived with her briefcase and a stack of papers, her eyes burning with purpose. The recordings are strong, but we need to act fast. Brian's not stupid, he'll sense the walls closing in. David nodded, glancing back at Emma's room. His daughter was fighting her way back piece by piece, and so would he. "No more waiting," he said. "It's time to bring him down." Sarah spread the papers across the hospital cafeteria table, her pen tapping as she walked David through each line. "These are the contracts Brian pushed through while you were searching for Emma. He funneled your signature authority into his own hands. Half of these deals reek of fraud." David stared at the pages, anger knotting in his stomach. His name was on them, scrawled in a signature that wasn't his. "He forged me." Sarah nodded grimly. "And he left a trail, transfers, accounts, wire movements. He got sloppy. That's our way in." Zoe leaned forward, her chin resting on her folded arms. "So what happens now? Do you just hand it to the cops?" Sarah looked at her, her expression softening. "Not yet. If we go too soon, he'll claim you misheard, or that these papers are just mistakes. We need enough evidence that no judge, no jury, no fancy lawyer can twist it." David rubbed his temples, exhaustion pulling at him. "And what if he catches on before we're ready?" "He already is," Sarah said flatly. "The car outside, the calls, the pressure, it means he's watching you, but that can work in our favour." David frowned. "How?" "Because arrogant men always slip when they think they're untouchable." She slid a folder across to him. Inside were transcripts of Zoe's recordings, every smug word Brian had let spill at the bar. "These are strong, but the real nail in the coffin will be catching him talking business with the wrong people." Zoe lifted her head. "I know where he goes, not just the bar. There's a restaurant on the east side. He meets guys there in suits, I've seen him." David blinked, surprised by her certainty. "How do you know all this?" She gave a small shrug, eyes dark. "When you live on the streets, you learn which doors to stay away from, and who walks in and out of them." For a moment, David just looked at her. The way she carried herself like someone twice her age, the way she noticed everything others ignored. She wasn't just helping them, she was carrying the kind of courage most adults never found. Sarah closed her folder. "Then that's where we go next. If Brian is reckless enough to meet his allies in public, we'll be ready. We'll make sure every word he says buries him deeper." David exhaled, his gaze drifting back to the window where the city lights flickered. Emma was safe for now, but the storm outside was building, and the man he once called brother was at the centre of it. This time, though, he wouldn't be blindsided. This time he would be ready. The Italian restaurant on the east side looked ordinary from the outside, its red awning faded, the glow of string lights soft against the windows. But for David, pulling his collar up as he walked past, it felt like stepping into enemy territory. He and Sarah sat 2 tables away from the corner booth, menus open in front of them, though neither could read a word. A small microphone was hidden inside Sarah's purse, feeding every sound back to her laptop in the car. Zoe, too young to blend in here, waited in the alley with earbuds in, listening to the stream. David's hands shook as he wrapped them around his water glass. "If this goes wrong—" "It won't," Sarah cut in firmly. "We just need him to talk. He can't resist bragging. Men like Brian never can." And then, right on time, Brian arrived. Sharp suit, polished shoes, that same confident grin David had once trusted. He slid into the booth across from 2 men already waiting, one a politician David recognised from the news, the other a detective he'd seen outside police headquarters more than once. David's gut twisted, he's bought them both. Sarah leaned slightly, her pen moving across a napkin as she mouthed, "Let him talk." David forced himself to stay put, though every instinct screamed at him to confront Brian then and there. Minutes passed. Then Brian leaned back, voice carrying just enough for the mic to pick up. "Relax, gentlemen. Miller is broken. He won't come near the office again. By the time he figures out what happened, the contracts will already be signed." The detective chuckled. "And the girl?" Brian's smile sharpened. "She's out of the way. He'll spend the rest of his life protecting her from shadows. Meanwhile, I'll be running everything we built. He'll thank me one day." David gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Sarah shot him a warning glance. Out in the alley, Zoe pressed her back against the wall, listening. Her stomach churned, but she kept the line steady, whispering into the mic clipped to her jacket. "Got it all, every word. Inside, Brian raised his glass, clinking it against the others. "To new beginnings," he said smugly. But what he didn't know was that every syllable was being recorded, every boast captured. And by the time dessert was served, the trap had already been sprung. David's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm as he watched his oldest friend toast to betrayal. For the first time, the fear inside him began to turn into something else, cold determination. Brian thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The next morning, David sat in Sarah's office, the blinds drawn tight against the rising sun. On her laptop screen, the audio from last night played on repeat. Brian's voice, smooth, arrogant, undeniable. "Miller is broken. By the time he figures it out, the contracts will already be signed." Every time David heard it, his stomach twisted. But alongside the fury, there was relief. Proof. Finally proof. Sarah leaned forward, her tone sharp. "This isn't just fraud, it's conspiracy. He bribed a cop, he bought a politician, and he admitted to it over dinner like it was nothing. With this, they can't brush you off anymore." David rubbed his forehead, his voice low. "And Emma's part? Her saying he locked her up, will they take that seriously?" Sarah's eyes softened. "They will now, his words connect the dots. It's enough for a warrant." Before David could answer, Zoe burst into the office, her small backpack slung over one shoulder. "The news is already talking," she said breathlessly. She pulled out her phone and set it on the desk. On the screen was a local news anchor, reporting live. Sources close to the Miller Corporation confirm an internal investigation into possible fraud. Shareholders are demanding answers from acting partner Brian Collins after unusual wire transfers surfaced this week. David's jaw tightened. Brian was losing control. Sarah picked up her phone. "I'm calling the DA, this is moving now." By that afternoon, the trap had fully snapped shut. Federal agents met David and Sarah outside the courthouse, folders in hand, their voices brisk but respectful. The recordings, the forged contracts, the financial trail, it was all enough. A judge signed the warrants before sunset. That night, David stood across the street from Brian's home, the glow of police lights washing over the neighbourhood. He watched silently as his former friend was led out in handcuffs, his polished suit stark against the flashing red and blue. Brian looked up, and for the first time in all their years together, there was no charm in his eyes. Only fury, only the bitter recognition that the man he thought broken was still standing. Beside David, Zoe shifted, her small hand tugging gently at his sleeve. "He can't hurt her anymore," she whispered. David's throat tightened. He looked down at her, this girl who had stepped out of the shadows of the city and into their lives. "No," he said softly, his gaze never leaving Brian. "Not anymore." The house was quiet for the first time in weeks. No police cars outside, no reporters leaning over the gate, no phone buzzing with Brian's fake concern. Just quiet. David sat at the kitchen table, Emma curled up in his lap, her head resting against his chest. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, and for once it didn't feel harsh, it felt like a promise. Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "Is he gone?" David kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart, he's gone. He won't come near us again." Her small shoulders relaxed, and she clutched the teddy bear closer. Across the table, Zoe sat with a bowl of cereal, her legs tucked under the chair. She looked out of place in the bright, polished kitchen, still wearing the same worn sweatshirt she'd had on the first day David met her. But when Emma smiled at her, it was as if she belonged here all along. "You should stay," Emma said suddenly, her voice still rough but certain. "You saved me." Zoe's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. She looked at David, uncertain. He swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "She's right. You saved her. You saved us." He reached across the table, covering Zoe's hand with his. "I don't know what your life has been up until now, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Not if you don't want to." For the first time, Zoe's tough exterior cracked. Her eyes welled with tears, and she blinked quickly, embarrassed. "Nobody's ever said that to me before." David squeezed her hand gently. "Well, get used to it, because from now on, you're part of this family." The words hung in the air, simple but life-changing. Emma smiled softly, her tiny hand reaching out to rest on Zoe's. For a long moment, the three of them just sat there. No past, no fear, no betrayal. Just the fragile, beautiful beginning of something new. Outside, a neighbour's lawnmower hummed to life, birds chirped in the trees, and for the first time since the nightmare began, the world felt ordinary again, ordinary and safe. 6 months later, the Miller house no longer felt like a place of fear. It was filled with the small sounds of everyday life. Emma's laughter drifting from the backyard, Zoe's sneakers thumping up the stairs, the smell of coffee in the kitchen on Saturday mornings. David stood in the living room, adjusting the frame of a new photograph on the wall. It showed the three of them at the ribbon cutting of a small brick building downtown. Above the door was a simple sign, the Emma and Zoe Foundation. The idea had been born at that same kitchen table where they had shared cereal and tears. David had sold his stake in the company, refusing to let Brian's shadow linger over his life. With Sarah's help, he had poured the money into something that mattered: shelters, after-school programs, legal aid for kids who had no one to fight for them. Emma wandered in, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, holding a crayon drawing. She handed it to David proudly. It was a picture of the three of them, hand in hand, under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, she had scrawled, "My family." David's throat tightened as he crouched to hug her. "It's perfect, sweetheart." Zoe appeared in the doorway, now in a school uniform, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. She grinned. "We're going to be late if you keep staring at drawings all day." Emma giggled, tugging at Zoe's hand. "Come on, big sister." The words hung in the air, and for a second Zoe froze. Then she smiled, wide and unguarded, and let Emma pull her toward the door. David watched them go, his chest swelling with something deeper than relief. Gratitude. For the girl who had survived, for the girl who had stepped out of the shadows to help, and for the second chance life had handed all of them. He glanced back at the photo on the wall, then out the window where sunlight spilled across the yard. Brian had tried to destroy him, but in the end he had built something stronger, something lasting. Family, and this time, no one could take it away. Lesson. True strength isn't just about fighting back. It's about protecting those you love, standing against betrayal, and turning pain into purpose. In the end, justice and love build a legacy far greater than revenge ever could. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and support. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.